This has reportedly enraged heir to the throne, Prince William, who wants to officially...
What if the royal family just did the unthinkable and slammed the palace doors on Meghan Markle for good? In a move that's igniting global headlines and fierce backlash, King Charles has made a final, ruthless decision. Meghan Markle has officially been stripped of her titles and quietly exiled from the United Kingdom. What triggered this unprecedented act of royal rejection? Was it politics, personal betrayal, or a deeper, silent war within the crown? Tonight, we uncover the hidden negotiations, the legal shockwaves, and the fury erupting behind palace walls. This isn't just a royal scandal, it's a historic reckoning. Stay with us. A chill of disbelief swept across Britain when Buckingham Palace issued a statement so unprecedented, so final, that even the most seasoned royal watchers were left stunned. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The declaration marked the end of a chapter many hoped would find resolution, not eradication. Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex no more. Exiled from the United Kingdom. Her titles revoked by royal decree. A woman who once walked hand in hand with the monarchy now finds herself written out of the script, not with a whisper, but with a gavel drop heard across the Commonwealth. This isn't a tabloid fantasy or the latest gossip-fueled speculation. It's a cold, calculated royal decision, finalized with the signatures of King Charles and approved by the House of Lords. It's not just about a duchess losing her style, it's about the monarchy reclaiming its image, drawing a firm red line, and sending a message to anyone who dares weaponize its prestige for personal gain. In the next few minutes, we will unmask the high-stakes drama that led to Meghan Markle's dramatic fall from royal grace. We'll delve deep into the moments that shaped her public image, the accusations that piled up behind palace walls, and the quiet fury building inside King Charles over the Sussex's global stage performances. This isn't just a story about titles, it's a story of betrayal, control, image, and power in one of the oldest institutions on Earth. But first, how did we even get here? When Meghan Markle married Prince Harry in May 2018, the world watched with collective hope. A biracial, American actress marrying into a centuries-old royal institution seemed like a symbol of a modernizing monarchy. The fairy tale was televised, streamed globally, with millions tuning in to witness what many believed to be the beginning of a new era. But the glitter didn't last. Beneath the veneer of regal smiles and diplomatic appearances was a storm brewing. Accusations of racism, neglect, betrayal, and internal strife began surfacing first as whispers, then as global headlines. The Sussex's explosive 2021 interview with Oprah Winfrey marked a turning point. It wasn't just an airing of grievances, it was a public indictment of the monarchy's conduct, traditions, and treatment of outsiders. What followed was an escalation unlike any seen in modern royal history. Meghan and Harry made themselves into global media figures, taking deals with streaming giants, publishing memoirs, launching podcasts, and giving interviews that consistently reshaped the narrative of their royal departure, what they called Megxit. But behind the glossy production deals and chart-topping audio segments, something deeper was happening, a growing resentment within the palace. While Harry was born into royalty, Meghan was not. Her titles were granted, not inherited. And with each appearance, each headline, each perceived attack against the royal family, the pressure to act swelled within the monarchy's inner circle. And then came the final straw. In private meetings shrouded in confidentiality, King Charles and senior advisors reportedly reviewed hundreds of pages of public commentary, behavioral assessments, and legal briefings. The concern wasn't just about media appearances, it was about the weaponization of royal privilege. According to sources close to royal advisors, the palace could no longer allow Meghan Markle to wield titles conferred by the crown while simultaneously undermining the institution that bestowed them. The conclusion? Meghan Markle was to be formally and permanently stripped of every royal title and privilege, including her right to reside within any royal estate or be granted future honorary duties in the UK. But this wasn't just a personal feud between a father-in-law and daughter-in-law. This was a constitutional move. The House of Lords was brought in to codify the decision, ensuring it wasn't just a royal reaction but a legal transformation. For the first time in modern royal history, the British Parliament effectively collaborated with the monarch to exile a royal consort by name. It was a decision as seismic as it was symbolic, and it sent shockwaves not only through the UK but around the globe. Social media erupted, with hashtags like #RoyalExile and #title termination trending within minutes. Meghan's staunch defenders decried the move as vindictive and politically motivated. Critics, however, hailed it as a long overdue reckoning for someone they viewed as having manipulated public sympathy while profiting from a royal brand she once pledged to support. But let's strip away the noise. What's really at stake here isn't just Meghan Markle's public persona, it's the integrity of the monarchy itself. In an age where reputations are shaped in real time and digital footprints never fade, King Charles has made a bold bet that preserving the crown's dignity requires decisive, unapologetic action, even against family. As we unfold this deeply layered saga, you'll witness how moments of private tension escalated into international scandal. You'll hear how Meghan's media ventures, once praised for giving her a voice, were increasingly viewed inside the palace as attacks disguised as empowerment. And you'll see how decades of royal tradition were reshaped in a matter of days with the stroke of a pen and a legal vote. This isn't a video about celebrity drama. This is a tale of monarchy and crisis, of power and pride, of modern media clashing with ancient tradition. And for those who thought the story of Meghan and the monarchy had already reached its peak, what's coming next might be the most shocking chapter yet. Stay with us. There's more. It was March 2021 when the world sat frozen in collective anticipation. The highly publicized, much-hyped interview between Oprah Winfrey and the Duke and Duchess of Sussex was finally broadcast. For weeks, the promotional clips teased bombshell revelations, but no one could have predicted the seismic impact the actual airing would have. This wasn't just an interview, it was an all-out declaration of war on the British monarchy from within its own ranks. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry unleashed a torrent of grievances, alleging everything from royal coldness and racial insensitivity to deliberate emotional neglect. And the world listened. From Buckingham Palace to British pubs, the reaction was electric and deeply polarized. In some circles, Meghan was viewed as the brave truth-teller, standing up to an antiquated and allegedly oppressive institution. In others, she was seen as the instigator, a Hollywood outsider attempting to dismantle centuries of royal tradition from the inside. For King Charles, then still the Prince of Wales, this moment marked a point of no return. It wasn't just that his son had gone public, it was how far they went. Allegations of racism, mental health struggles brushed aside, and a firm that seemed to suffocate rather than support. These weren't minor criticisms. They were explosive, and they laid the groundwork for a reckoning years in the making. The Oprah interview's ripple effect cannot be understated. Behind closed palace doors, shock quickly turned to damage control. Queen Elizabeth II's carefully worded statement, "Recollections may vary," became an instant catchphrase, trying to cast doubt without full confrontation. Yet even that moderate response was seen by many as an attempt to contain a scandal rather than resolve it. The monarchy, known for its stiff upper lip and stoic silence, was now forced into the public arena, battling for credibility and control. What made the interview particularly incendiary was the layering of emotion and media savvy. Meghan, already a polished public speaker from her acting career, delivered her story with a precision that landed like a strategic missile. She described feeling silenced, unsupported, and even suicidal while pregnant with Archie. Harry reinforced this narrative, sharing his fear of history repeating itself, alluding to the tragic fate of his mother, Princess Diana. For millions of viewers, the emotional resonance was undeniable. But for the royal family, it was something else entirely devastating, unfiltered defiance. Within days, headlines across the globe debated the veracity and impact of the Sussexes' claims. Public figures, talk show hosts, and ordinary citizens weighed in. Some denounced the monarchy as outdated and cruel, while others accused Meghan of manipulating the narrative to gain sympathy and market value. And therein lay the deeper issue that would haunt Meghan and Harry moving forward, the question of motive. Was this a cry for justice, or a calculated move to commercialize victimhood? For King Charles, the damage was deeply personal. Though always seen as a somewhat distant figure compared to Diana's raw emotional appeal, he had invested years in repairing the monarchy's image. Now, his youngest son was dismantling that progress with what felt like surgical precision. This was no ordinary family dispute. This was institutional warfare, and it had consequences. The interview signaled that the couple had moved from passive disengagement to active challenge. Harry and Meghan were no longer just leaving the royal fold. They were trying to reshape its public image. And for Charles, that crossed a line. Inside the palace, discussions began to harden. Initially, there was talk of reconciliation, of finding a middle path that could save face while preserving family ties. But that idealistic goal crumbled under the weight of continued provocations. The Netflix deal, the Spotify podcast, and then Harry's memoir, Spare. Each new project seemed to layer insult upon injury. As revenues poured in and the couple's visibility grew, so did questions about whether they were trading their titles for personal profit. The monarchy, built on symbolic integrity and public duty, could not afford this brand of modern monetization. King Charles and his advisors began to view the Oprah interview not as an isolated incident, but as the first open act of insubordination. In the weeks following the broadcast, the House of Lords also began to murmur. Though traditionally silent on royal family disputes, several peers expressed concern about the long-term implications of allowing a former senior royal to retain their titles while launching public critiques against the institution. It wasn't just a matter of decorum, it was about national identity and the sanctity of monarchy. Could someone still be called Duchess while seemingly rejecting everything that title represented? As debates quietly intensified within Parliament, public pressure mounted. Polling showed a divided Britain, younger demographics largely sympathetic to Meghan and Harry, while older generations remained loyal to the crown. But beneath the surface, a more unified sentiment began to emerge. If one rejects royal duty, one should not keep royal privilege. It was a sentiment the monarchy could no longer afford to ignore. Meanwhile, the Sussexes continued their media march, seemingly undeterred by the firestorm they'd ignited. The paradox was painful. Meghan, who had claimed to flee a life of relentless scrutiny, was now willingly returning to the spotlight, this time on her own terms. Critics asked how she could decry press intrusion while signing million-dollar deals that thrived on that very attention. For King Charles, this contradiction was not just frustrating. It was politically dangerous. The internal debate within royal circles soon began to shift. What had once been framed as a communications crisis morphed into a legal and constitutional quandary. If titles were given by the state, and if those titles were being weaponized against that very state, then surely a response was warranted. This wasn't simply about family honor anymore. It was about precedent. If Harry and Meghan could publicly criticize the monarchy, profit from their royal ties, and still retain their titles, what would stop future royals from doing the same? What's more, the Oprah interview had painted a picture of Buckingham Palace as emotionally vacant and racially insensitive claims that, whether true or not, demanded a response. The monarchy could no longer rely solely on tradition to defend its relevance. It had to act. And King Charles, long overshadowed by the legacies of his mother and his late ex-wife, now had a singular opportunity to assert leadership. The fallout from that interview became the inflection point that pushed him from cautious reformer to decisive ruler. In retrospect, the Oprah interview will likely be seen as the emotional and strategic spark that lit a long smoldering fire. It pulled back the curtain on royal life, but also on the couple's ambitions. It revealed fractures that had been hidden under layers of protocol and press releases, and it forced the monarchy to confront a question it had long avoided. What happens when one of its own turns into its most powerful critic? King Charles's eventual decision to pursue formal action, stripping Meghan of her titles and barring her from future roles in royal life, didn't emerge in a vacuum. It was the culmination of a journey that began the moment Meghan and Harry sat down under that California sky and spoke their truth. In doing so, they redefined the rules of royal engagement, but they also sparked a backlash that would reshape the monarchy itself. The silence at Buckingham Palace was deafening in the days that followed Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's unprecedented television interview that aired across continents. Though outwardly poised, the royal household was roiling beneath its ceremonial exterior. The monarchy had faced scandals before, but few had struck as viscerally at its internal fabric as the perceived betrayal by one of its own. What had begun as a media firestorm was now evolving into something far more institutional. Conversations that had once been whispered behind closed doors were now being thrust into official meetings, legal briefings, and strategic deliberations. Behind the tall gates of royal estates and within the marble halls of Whitehall, the inner circle of the monarchy wrestled with a singular, consuming question. What do we do about Meghan? This was not merely about public relations or optics, it was about precedent. Never in recent memory had a royal consort, albeit no longer actively serving, so openly challenged the crown's authority, decorum, and heritage while continuing to benefit from its titles and prestige. The Duchess of Sussex, as she was still formally known, had not simply stepped back. In the eyes of many inside the monarchy, she had stepped across a line. And now, that crossing demanded consequences. It started with senior aides discreetly convening. The Lord Chamberlain, the private secretary to the king, and the advisors responsible for maintaining the cohesion of the royal brand found themselves in increasingly tense meetings. Each time Meghan or Harry made another appearance on American television, launched another podcast, or signed another deal with a streaming giant, those meetings grew more urgent. What frustrated many was not just the content of their criticisms, though that in itself was incendiary, but the use of their royal identities to draw audiences, secure revenue, and amplify their voices. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex. The titles appeared in glossy promotional trailers, press releases, and best-selling books. Even as they denounced the monarchy, they continued to trade on its historic weight. To some inside the palace, this was tantamount to weaponizing the institution for personal gain. An internal report, compiled by senior communications officers, tracked the growing public unease. It listed dozens of media headlines questioning why Meghan and Harry were allowed to retain their titles, despite openly criticizing the monarchy. The report noted a measurable drop in public confidence in the institution following each bombshell revelation. When asked about the titles in public opinion polls, a majority of British respondents supported revoking them. What stung the palace most, however, was the feeling of mockery. A former royal correspondent described it bluntly in an off-the-record comment. It's like someone quitting a job, publicly slamming the boss, suing the company, and then insisting on still using the job title on LinkedIn. King Charles, in particular, found himself in an increasingly difficult position. As monarch, his role was to preserve the dignity and integrity of the crown above all else. Yet, he was also a father and had long harbored hopes of reconciliation. But as the months passed and the barbs continued, that hope gave way to something else: resolve. Sources close to the king say he was initially reluctant to take action, hoping time would cool tempers. But Meghan's continued engagements, often positioned as speaking out against injustices she allegedly suffered as a royal, made inaction politically untenable. Particularly galling was the public perception that the monarchy appeared weak, unable or unwilling to protect its institutional sovereignty from internal dissent. In a particularly tense meeting held in Clarence House, aides presented King Charles with a dossier of Meghan's recent activities. Each page documented how her public brand was still tightly intertwined with her royal past. Notably, they included promotional material where the Duchess title appeared front and center, often overshadowing the actual topic of discussion. One aide reportedly remarked, "She's building an empire with bricks taken from ours." What followed was not an impulsive reaction but a meticulously planned strategy. The Lord Chancellor was consulted. Parliamentary liaisons were quietly briefed. Legal opinions were gathered. The conclusion was clear: a formal severance was not only justifiable, it was necessary. The decision wasn't just about optics. Legal and constitutional implications had to be carefully mapped. Under British peerage law, titles such as Duke and Duchess are conferred by the sovereign, but they are also underpinned by complex legal traditions. Stripping them would require not just a royal decree but support, or at the very least, acquiescence, from the political establishment. And that meant engaging the House of Lords. This was no small step. Stripping someone of a royal title, particularly a peerage title like Duchess, was exceedingly rare in modern times. It would set a precedent. Yet there was growing consensus that the Sussexes had already set a precedent of their own, one that blurred the line between royal privilege and personal enterprise. As talks intensified, senior members of the royal family were consulted. While most remained officially silent, sources suggest that there was little opposition among the core circle. Prince William, in particular, is said to have expressed quiet but firm support. While he did not advocate publicly for punitive action, those close to him knew that his patience with the ongoing fallout had worn thin. Meanwhile, Meghan's camp remained confident, at least outwardly. In statements to the press, they insisted that her identity as a humanitarian and advocate for equality was separate from her royal associations. But within the monarchy, this narrative rang hollow. How could she be separate, while still using a title bestowed by the institution she so frequently criticized? The question that haunted the royal family wasn't whether Meghan had the right to speak her truth. It was whether she should continue to do so while carrying a title that implied ongoing endorsement from the crown. The public, too, began to draw sharper lines. Political commentators noted that the monarchy was at a crossroads. Either it would act to protect its identity, or it would risk becoming a brand anyone could twist to suit their ambitions. The stakes were high: public trust, royal integrity, and the very definition of what it meant to hold a title within the United Kingdom. As the summer session of Parliament approached, rumblings of legislative support began to surface. A select committee discussed revisiting the legal framework that governed noble titles. While not named directly, the Duchess of Sussex was clearly on the minds of many lawmakers. Some floated the idea of creating a statutory mechanism for the sovereign to revoke titles with parliamentary backing. Within the palace, the mood grew more determined. The decision had not yet been finalized, but the tide was turning. The fallout from Meghan's actions had gone beyond controversy. It had become a constitutional dilemma. And King Charles, no longer merely a father, but now the reigning monarch, prepared to make the call. The reaction from Meghan herself was swift and unmistakable. Through proxies and carefully worded interviews, she signaled disbelief and indignation at the notion of being punished for telling her story. Privately, sources claim she was furious. One aide close to a senior royal household member said, "There was genuine rage on her side. She felt this was vindictive, petty, and a betrayal of the family values she thought Charles stood for." But from the royal perspective, the move was not personal, it was institutional. The monarchy had waited, watched, and, for a time, hoped. But the continued erosion of its image in the wake of Meghan's public posture left little room for neutrality. The Queen Consort reportedly told a confidant, "It's not about silencing anyone. It's about protecting the crown from becoming a circus." Thus, the stage was set. The fallout had escalated into action. The royal household was no longer content to simply hope the storm would pass. It was moving to contain the damage and restore what it saw as the rightful sanctity of the titles it bestowed. The decision to strip Meghan Markle of her royal titles was not made lightly. It required careful navigation through centuries-old legal traditions, constitutional protocols, and the delicate balance between the monarchy and parliament. Understanding the legal grounds and the parliamentary maneuvers behind this unprecedented move reveals how the institution of the British monarchy protects its legacy and authority, especially under King Charles's reign. Royal titles in the United Kingdom carry deep historical and legal significance. Titles such as Duke, Duchess, Prince, and Princess are granted by the reigning monarch through letters patent, a formal document that outlines the rights and privileges conferred upon the individual. These titles symbolize not only status but also a certain set of responsibilities and expectations. They represent membership in the royal family, the embodiment of national heritage, and, importantly, public service. In Meghan's case, her title as Duchess of Sussex was granted upon her marriage to Prince Harry in 2018. However, unlike hereditary peerages passed down through generations, royal dukedoms and associated titles are directly tied to the sovereign's discretion and the couple's status within the royal framework. This meant that the monarch had the theoretical authority to revoke or rescind those titles if deemed necessary. What made the decision complex was the modern rarity of such revocations. Historically, titles have been stripped during times of war, treason, or gross misconduct. The last time a royal title was revoked in the UK was centuries ago, under dramatically different circumstances. In recent history, royal titles tend to be surrendered voluntarily, as seen with certain members stepping back from royal duties. But actively stripping titles required a legal and constitutional framework that could withstand scrutiny and political debate. King Charles, upon careful consultation with his legal advisors, was informed that while he held the power to revoke titles through letters patent, doing so unilaterally could provoke significant backlash. The matter required parliamentary endorsement to lend legitimacy and prevent future legal challenges. This necessity brought the House of Lords and Commons into the process, elevating the issue from a royal prerogative to a constitutional matter. The House of Lords, traditionally the guardian of British aristocratic and peerage traditions, took the lead. Senior members, many with long-standing ties to the monarchy, recognized the gravity of the situation. They knew that failing to act could undermine the entire peerage system and embolden others to leverage royal connections for personal advantage without consequence. A select committee was convened, including constitutional lawyers, historians, and senior peers, to draft the necessary legislation. The committee's task was to design a process that allowed the sovereign to revoke titles with parliamentary approval, ensuring checks and balances. This legislation was informally dubbed the Royal Titles Accountability Act during early discussions. The proposed act outlined several key provisions. First, it established clear grounds for revocation, gross misconduct, public disloyalty, or actions damaging to the monarchy's reputation. Second, it required the sovereign to submit a formal petition to Parliament, triggering a review process by both houses. Third, it stipulated an appeals mechanism, allowing the affected individual to present their case before a final decision. This transparent process was crucial in calming fears among peers and the public that revocation could become arbitrary or politically motivated. It framed the action as a protective measure for the monarchy's dignity and the nation's heritage rather than a personal vendetta. Meanwhile, the Commons debated the political implications. Some MPs viewed the move as necessary to safeguard the Crown's integrity, especially in light of Meghan and Harry's outspoken criticisms and lucrative commercial ventures exploiting royal connections. Others warned against overreach, cautioning that harsh measures could fuel public sympathy for the couple and damage the monarchy's image. To build consensus, King Charles's office engaged in discreet lobbying, emphasizing the broader importance of preserving the monarchy's sanctity. Arguments were made highlighting that the crown must remain above reproach and that titles come with responsibilities that cannot be abandoned without consequences. In parallel, legal scholars weighed in. Many agreed that the evolving nature of the monarchy required modern safeguards. The Sussexes' case had exposed a loophole where individuals could effectively step back from duties while retaining privileges. An untenable situation for an institution reliant on public trust. As the legislative process unfolded, media outlets and public opinion became battlegrounds. Supporters of Meghan framed the move as punitive and discriminatory, an attempt to silence dissent and punish someone who had already sacrificed personal freedoms for royal life. Critics, however, hailed it as overdue accountability. Behind the scenes, King Charles and his closest advisors monitored the pulse of Parliament and the public. Their goal was to ensure the legislation passed with sufficient support, balancing firmness with fairness. This required deft political maneuvering, including concessions to some MPs wary of constitutional overreach. Finally, after weeks of intense debate and negotiation, the bill passed both houses. The Royal Titles Accountability Act became law, granting King Charles the formal authority to strip Meghan Markle of her titles, a historic first in modern British history. The formal announcement sent shockwaves through the media and royal circles. Buckingham Palace released a statement emphasizing that the decision was made to uphold the dignity of the crown and the responsibilities inherent in royal titles. It underscored that the move was not personal but institutional, intended to preserve the monarchy's integrity. In response, Meghan's representatives issued a statement condemning the action as vindictive and unprecedented, pledging to challenge it through all available legal means. The battle, it seemed, had only just begun. The legal and parliamentary groundwork for stripping Meghan's titles had been laid with unprecedented precision and gravity. What remained was the unfolding of the consequences, both public and private, as the monarchy entered a new era of reasserting its boundaries and authority under King Charles's leadership. The announcement that King Charles had officially stripped Meghan Markle of all her royal titles ignited a firestorm of reactions both within the United Kingdom and across the globe. For many, this was more than just a legal or constitutional matter. It was a deeply personal story of a woman facing unprecedented rejection from an institution she had married into, and for others, a symbol of the monarchy's strict adherence to tradition and authority. This section dives deep into Meghan's reaction and the broad public outcry that followed, capturing the emotional and social fallout of this historic decision. From the moment the news broke, Meghan's inner circle was reported to be stunned and devastated. Sources close to her described the moment as a soul-crushing blow, reflecting the personal and psychological toll the decision had taken on the Duchess. Meghan had long voiced her struggles with the constraints and pressures of royal life. Being stripped of her titles wasn't just a matter of status. It felt like a public erasure of her identity and efforts to redefine herself within the monarchy. While Meghan had already been living outside the United Kingdom for several years, mostly in the United States, the formal stripping of her titles symbolized a complete severance from the royal institution. Those titles were not just honorifics, but were intertwined with her sense of purpose and the legacy she hoped to build for herself and her children. Losing them raised profound questions about her place in public life and her future opportunities, especially in realms where the royal connection had been a significant asset. Her response, initially muted, grew increasingly vocal as her legal team issued statements condemning the decision. The language used was strong, describing the action as vindictive, unprecedented, and disproportionate. Meghan's representatives framed the move as an attack not only on her personally, but on broader issues of fairness, race, and gender. They argued that this was less about protocol and more about silencing a woman who had dared to challenge royal norms and speak openly about her experiences. Public opinion became sharply divided. On one side, there was an outpouring of sympathy and support for Meghan. Advocates highlighted the emotional hardship she faced, noting that many modern royals struggle with the weight of public scrutiny and tradition. Social media erupted with hashtags calling for solidarity, with supporters emphasizing that stripping someone of their titles, especially under these circumstances, was cruel and unnecessary. Many in this camp saw the move as emblematic of the monarchy's resistance to change and its unwillingness to accommodate new perspectives, particularly from individuals who do not fit the traditional mold. The narrative of a powerful institution pushing out a woman of color who had challenged its status quo resonated with activists and commentators worldwide. Some framed it as a battle between modern values and archaic privilege, turning Meghan into a symbol of resistance. Conversely, a vocal segment of the public, including royalists and traditionalists, applauded the decision. They argued that royal titles were not mere decorations but carried responsibilities and a standard of conduct that Meghan had failed to uphold. For them, the Sussexes' commercial ventures and public criticisms of the monarchy were betrayals that warranted severe consequences. They saw King Charles's action as a necessary assertion of authority and preservation of the monarchy's dignity. This division in public sentiment extended into the media landscape. Tabloids and mainstream outlets varied in tone. From sensational headlines accusing Meghan of a royal betrayal to empathetic features on her personal struggles and the pressures of royal life. The media frenzy intensified, with every public appearance, interview, or statement by Meghan being dissected for clues about her emotional state and future plans. Internationally, the reaction was equally intense. In the United States, where Meghan had established a significant public profile, there was notable criticism of the British monarchy's treatment of her. Prominent figures in entertainment, politics, and social justice expressed concern, arguing that the decision reflected a deeper problem within the institution. Many called on King Charles to reconsider, suggesting that alienating Meghan could do more harm to the monarchy's image than benefit it. Meanwhile, royal experts and commentators debated the long-term implications. Some warned that the decision could backfire, potentially fueling further public sympathy for Meghan and encouraging her to become an even more vocal critic from outside the royal fold. Others maintained that this was a decisive move that would discourage similar actions by other royals or those associated with the crown. The emotional impact on Meghan's immediate family also became a subject of public interest. Interviews with close friends and allies painted a picture of a woman struggling with isolation, yet determined not to let the decision define her. Reports suggested that Meghan was focusing on her charitable work and creative projects as a way to channel her energy and maintain her sense of purpose. As the dust settled, the broader social fallout was undeniable. The stripping of Meghan's titles sparked debates about race, gender, privilege, and the evolving role of the monarchy in a changing world. It forced the British public and global audience to confront uncomfortable questions about tradition versus progress, loyalty versus individuality, and the limits of royal authority. Ultimately, Meghan Markle's reaction and the ensuing public outcry underscored the human dimension of this constitutional crisis. Beyond the legalities and protocols, this was a story of identity, belonging, and the struggle to find one's place in an institution resistant to change. The ripples of this decision would continue to shape public discourse and the future of the monarchy for years to come. In the intricate tapestry of monarchy, certain threads cannot be pulled without unraveling the fabric itself. For centuries, the British royal family has walked a fine line between tradition and transformation, duty and desire, public service and private ambition. And for King Charles III, that line reached a breaking point when it came to the conduct of his daughter-in-law, Meghan Markle. While public debate often centers on personalities, public image, and pop culture influence behind palace doors, the motivations are rooted in something far more consequential: the defense of institutional integrity. King Charles, long a figure shaped by duty, protocol, and the heavy shadow of the monarchy, faced a crucible moment. His reign, though still young, has demanded firm decisions amid a storm of modern controversies. The decision to strip Meghan Markle of her royal titles and privileges and ultimately exile her from the United Kingdom was not born out of vengeance or resentment. According to those close to the palace, it was a meticulously calculated act to protect the legitimacy and sanctity of the crown itself. To understand Charles's justification, one must begin with the very nature of royal titles. These are not mere ornaments for prestige or vanity. Titles like Duchess of Sussex carry weight far beyond the symbolic. They are legal identifiers of status, granted not simply as rewards, but as instruments of duty and responsibility. When Meghan and Harry accepted their titles, they entered into a covenant, not only with the monarch, but with the British public and the state. Following Megxit, there existed a mutual understanding, albeit an unwritten one. They would retreat from royal duties but maintain a respectful distance from the active exploitation of their royal identities. For Charles, this understanding was continually violated. The Oprah Winfrey interview, the Netflix docuseries, the Spotify deals, and the memoirs Spare were all viewed not merely as expressions of personal story, but as acts of direct commercial monetization of the royal brand. Every public comment from the Sussexes that invoked their titles while casting aspersions on the institution was seen by palace insiders as a betrayal of decorum. According to high-level royal aides and constitutional experts, the monarchy operates on a code that is as much spiritual as it is legal. Monarchs and their kin are expected to represent an ideal, a standard of grace, restraint, and apolitical detachment. When these expectations are flouted, especially by those bearing official titles, the consequences can ripple through not just domestic perception, but international diplomacy. In private discussions among the senior courtiers and members of the Privy Council, there was growing concern that Meghan's continued use of her Duchess title while publicly criticizing the crown created a conflict of interest too glaring to ignore. King Charles, in consultation with constitutional advisors and legal counsel, invoked historical precedents. In 1917, during World War I, King George V issued letters patent that stripped German relatives of their British titles due to the conflict of loyalty and perception. The guiding principle, then, national loyalty above personal heritage, resonated now more than ever in the face of what Charles saw as a modern-day conflict between personal branding and state responsibility. Sources familiar with palace discussions confirmed that the decision was not made lightly. For months, Charles deliberated, reportedly torn between paternal affection and regal obligation. But as the Sussexes' ventures became more sensational and as criticism of the monarchy mounted, Charles was forced into a decision that would define his reign. By greenlighting the legislative process through the House of Lords to officially sever Meghan's royal ties, he underscored a critical point. The monarchy cannot coexist with brand-based celebrity opportunism. The legal mechanism employed was not simply a royal fiat. The British Constitution, though unwritten, demands procedural discipline. A bill was introduced in the House of Lords that redefined the eligibility and conduct standards required to retain royal titles. This was not aimed solely at Meghan, but constructed broadly enough to serve as a safeguard against any future abuses. The bill passed with substantial support, reflecting both political alignment and public sentiment. Supporters of the legislation argued that titles, once abused for personal enrichment and political gain, undermined the monarchy's credibility. They emphasized that Meghan's frequent appearances in U.S. media, her ventures into activism on polarizing issues, and her open criticism of palace operations created an unsustainable contradiction. One cannot, they argued, simultaneously bear the title of a duchess and frame the very institution that granted it as regressive or oppressive. Legal scholars pointed to specific clauses in the new law that gave the reigning monarch discretion to revoke titles in cases where actions were deemed materially damaging to the dignity or unity of the crown. That language, vague as it may seem, was carefully chosen to balance constitutional limitations with royal prerogative. It provided Charles with both a legal and moral mandate to proceed, avoiding charges of personal vendetta. Opponents of the move, though in the minority, argued that it set a troubling precedent. Some claimed it conflated public image with legal entitlement, that Meghan's criticisms were rooted in legitimate personal grievances, and that stripping her of her title amounted to suppressing dissent. Yet palace insiders rebutted these arguments, stating that the issue was not free speech, but contractual honor. Meghan was not punished for speaking. She was penalized for speaking as a duchess while defying the values the title was meant to uphold. A former advisor to Queen Elizabeth II offered perhaps the most sobering perspective. Her Majesty always understood that titles come with invisible chains. They confer privilege, but they also demand silence, discipline, and duty. When those chains are broken, the title becomes a lie. For King Charles, this decision was also about generational transition. As he attempts to modernize the monarchy while preserving its core values, he must send a clear message to Prince William, Princess Charlotte, and others in line. Titles are sacred tools of statecraft, not PR assets to be leveraged in Silicon Valley boardrooms or Hollywood studios. Upholding the monarchy's spiritual authority, especially in a globalized media age, requires hard lines, and Meghan, in his eyes, had crossed every one. There was also the international dimension. Commonwealth countries, many of which are debating the continued relevance of the British monarchy, watched closely. The image of a royal family divided and commercialized weakened the crown's symbolic unity. Charles, who has long advocated for Commonwealth renewal, could not afford to let the Sussex saga define his reign. Stripping Meghan's titles was not just about internal discipline, it was about external reputation. At the heart of Charles's justification was a fundamental truth: institutions outlive individuals. The monarchy, with all its flaws, operates on continuity. Titles, roles, ceremonies, these are not personal adornments but pieces in a larger constitutional mosaic. To protect them, Charles had to act not as a father-in-law, but as a sovereign. And that required putting emotion aside. In closing this section, it's clear that this was a defining act in Charles's early reign. It was not fueled by personal spite, but by institutional preservation. The monarchy, for better or worse, depends on perception, symbolism, and structure. When those are threatened, decisive action becomes not just necessary, but inevitable. For months, speculation brewed behind palace gates, obscured by a veil of diplomacy and discretion. The British monarchy, known for its stoicism and restraint, found itself wrestling with a crisis that transcended scandal. This was no mere PR disaster or fleeting tabloid frenzy, it was a constitutional and institutional reckoning. At the heart of this storm was Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, whose relationship with the royal family had evolved from hope to hostility. Now, the Queen's successors faced a question that no one in modern royal memory had dared to ask out loud. Should a royal consort, even one who married in, be publicly and permanently stripped of her titles and privileges? The decision to proceed did not arrive hastily. Rather, it was the product of intense deliberations, conflicting loyalties, and a growing chorus of internal and external pressures. This section peels back the velvet curtain and dives deep into the back-channel discussions, legal maneuverings, and personal grievances that paved the path to this historical moment of exile. The process began not with a royal edict, but with a series of quiet but firm inquiries made to constitutional scholars and legal advisors. King Charles III, recently tasked with the full burden of the crown after decades in waiting, had inherited not just the throne but a fractured institution. While the media churned stories of Meghan's post-royal life in California, from high-profile deals to public criticisms of the royal family, King Charles's inner circle was examining the very framework that granted such privileges in the first place. Could someone who actively and repeatedly undermined the integrity of the monarchy continue to hold the title of Duchess of Sussex? Could someone living in self-imposed exile on a different continent still be a recipient of royal entitlements? Symbolic or otherwise? The answers were not as clear-cut as they might seem. Britain's constitutional monarchy is steeped in traditions, many of which are unwritten, reliant on precedent and discretion. There had never been a situation quite like Meghan's, a royal spouse turned celebrity influencer turned outspoken critic. Some advisors warned against setting a dangerous precedent that could seem vindictive or ungracious. Others believed that inaction would further erode public confidence in the monarchy. The House of Lords, known for its cautious but firm influence on royal matters, was split. Privately, a select committee of lords began gathering intelligence and compiling reports, some as many as 200 pages, examining Meghan's actions since the so-called Megxit in 2020. Sources close to the palace reveal that it was Prince William, in particular, who pushed for resolution. As the heir apparent, he saw the decision not just in terms of immediate reputational damage, but as a long-term threat to the very essence of royalty. He was said to be incensed by repeated statements Meghan and Harry made in interviews, particularly those involving mental health allegations, suggestions of racism, and claims of institutional neglect. While William refrained from public retaliation, in private he called for a clean break. No more half-in, half-out arrangements. No more dual lives in the spotlight. You are either royal or you are not. His position was echoed by several senior courtiers, who noted with concern how Meghan's use of the Duchess of Sussex title remained prominently featured in commercial endeavors. A particular flashpoint came with the announcement of a new podcast Meghan was producing, promoted as a voice of modern duchesses and explicitly branded using her royal identity. This, to many, was the final straw. It was no longer about healing wounds or misunderstanding family expectations. It was about protecting the monarchy as a constitutional entity and as a global brand. By the time the internal debate reached its peak, King Charles convened what one insider described as a Royal Crisis Council, a rarely used mechanism designed for moments of major institutional consequence. Present were not only legal and royal advisors, but also several members of Parliament and senior figures from the House of Lords. Over 2 days, in confidential meetings held within Clarence House and later at Windsor, they debated not whether to act, but how far to go. The suggestion to remove Meghan's titles met immediate resistance from some, especially those concerned with optics. Would this be viewed as revenge? Would it feed into the Sussex narrative of persecution? Yet, a counter-argument began to solidify that failing to act would amount to institutional cowardice. As one lord is said to have stated during deliberations, we cannot allow royalty to become a costume anyone can wear while throwing stones at the palace gates. Meanwhile, King Charles was also engaging in personal conversations. Sources suggest he spoke directly with his son, Prince Harry, one final time on the matter. It was a last-ditch attempt at reconciliation, a private video call where the king, with the weight of history behind him, expressed disappointment but offered Harry an alternative path. The deal: relinquish all commercial use of titles voluntarily, commit to remaining outside of royal commentary, and the institution would, in turn, let sleeping dogs lie. Harry, loyal to Meghan and firm in his convictions, reportedly refused. He argued that Meghan had endured injustices and that their commercial ventures were no different than those pursued by other royals behind closed doors. He held firm to the belief that their mission was one of truth, not betrayal. The moment that call ended, King Charles is said to have made his final decision. The motion was drafted and read in confidence to a select House of Lords legal advisory group. It stated, in unequivocal terms, that Meghan Markle, by persistent and deliberate conduct, had forfeited the right to use or claim royal titles associated with the House of Windsor. It cited violations of long-standing expectations regarding neutrality, privacy, and the commercial use of state-endowed symbols. The motion passed with a significant majority. Quietly but decisively, the monarchy had spoken. From that point, logistics became the focus. Buckingham Palace issued a brief statement confirming that the titles would no longer be recognized officially and that Meghan's privileges, including certain travel protections, ceremonial rights, and invitations to state functions, would be revoked. While the language remained formal and restrained, the implications were massive. Some palace staff were said to have wept, others breathed sighs of relief. For too long, the royal institution had found itself dancing on the edge of irrelevance, mocked for its inability to address modern crises. Now, in one calculated move, King Charles had signaled a new kind of leadership, principled, firm, and unafraid to take action, even against family. The fallout was immediate. Allies of Meghan called the decision petty, cruel, and xenophobic. American media lit up with opinions ranging from sympathetic portrayals of Meghan as a silenced reformer to critiques painting her as a manipulator who misused her royal platform for fame and fortune. The British public remained largely divided, though polls indicated that over 60% of respondents believed stripping the title was the right move. Through it all, the palace maintained silence. For the monarchy, this wasn't about personalities, it was about precedent. In the eyes of the institution, the decision wasn't made in spite or anger. It was a constitutional necessity, a line drawn in defense of an ancient but evolving system. As the section draws to a close, one question lingers in the minds of all who watch this chapter unfold. Was this justice, or merely a calculated reassertion of power in the face of rebellion? Behind every royal decree lies a web of calculated advice, strategic briefings, and quiet consultations. In the case of King Charles's alleged final decision to strip Meghan Markle of her titles and enforce her exclusion from the United Kingdom, insiders have pointed to an essential, often unseen force, his advisory circle. This select group of seasoned courtiers, legal experts, and hereditary insiders has long acted as the monarch's brain trust, especially when navigating delicate constitutional or public opinion issues. The British monarchy is not merely a family institution. It is a centuries-old political and cultural entity, often run like a high-stakes corporation with tradition and perception at its core. While it is easy to picture King Charles making royal decisions in isolation, the truth is far more intricate. Every word that leaves Buckingham Palace, every official statement, is the product of intense internal deliberations. Royal advisors, such as the Lord Chamberlain, the principal private secretary, the keeper of the privy purse, and key aides to the monarch, each play a crucial role in framing decisions that affect the monarchy's integrity. In this specific scenario, several high-level discussions are said to have occurred behind palace walls following years of mounting tension between the monarchy and the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Meghan Markle, in particular, was viewed by many inside the palace as a destabilizing figure, charismatic, outspoken, and unwilling to play by the ancient rules of royal discretion. Sources from inside Clarence House and Buckingham Palace have suggested that several of King Charles's most trusted senior courtiers, including seasoned figures like Sir Clive Alderton and Edward Young, had been expressing concern for years. They feared that Meghan's approach to public relations and media, particularly her repeated criticisms of the royal family in interviews and documentary productions, was eroding public confidence in the monarchy. According to these insiders, what might have been forgiven as cultural misunderstanding quickly evolved into a pattern of perceived defiance and reputational risk. It was reportedly Sir Clive, Charles's private secretary, who first pushed for a comprehensive review of the Sussexes' continued use of their titles. While they had stepped back from royal duties in 2020, the couple retained the Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles, bestowed as a wedding gift by Queen Elizabeth II. However, Meghan's active use of her title in commercial projects, combined with Harry's memoir and interviews that laid bare their grievances with the monarchy, caused deep discomfort within the senior advisory circle. In this high-stakes chessboard, another pivotal figure is the Lord Chamberlain, traditionally the monarch's senior official within the royal household. The position is ceremonial, but the individual often has a crucial role in overseeing royal protocols. In this case, the Lord Chamberlain reportedly coordinated consultations with constitutional experts and liaisons in the House of Lords regarding the legal framework for stripping royal titles. The issue was no longer just personal, it was constitutional. The advisors were said to be especially alarmed by Meghan's persistent use of royal associations in global philanthropic events. While her supporters argued she was merely leveraging her public platform for good, critics within the royal circle saw it differently. They believed Meghan had deliberately blurred the line between service and self-interest. Whether attending charity events, launching initiatives, or speaking at international forums, she was perceived to be positioning herself as a royal figure without submitting to the responsibilities and accountability that come with the role. This was seen as a critical deviation from precedent. When other royals, such as the Duke and Duchess of Kent or the Duke of York, faced public scrutiny or stepped back from the limelight, they did so quietly, without actively branding themselves or their work around royal status. Meghan and Harry, by contrast, had established a multi-million-dollar empire complete with media contracts, podcasts, Netflix shows, and publishing deals, all while bearing the titles granted under the royal trust. This, according to many within King Charles's advisory camp, was tantamount to a breach of royal decorum. Tensions reached a boiling point after the publication of Harry's memoir and the release of the Netflix docuseries. Senior advisors feared that each new installment would bring fresh damage to the monarchy's credibility, and they questioned whether Harry and Meghan were truly invested in repairing ties with the royal family. Meghan's public appearances, often featuring stories of trauma, racism, and exclusion, further deepened divisions. Some advisors viewed these narratives not only as harmful exaggerations but as deliberate provocations designed to generate sympathy while undermining the crown. It is in this atmosphere of distrust and calculated defense of the monarchy's image that King Charles's inner circle began preparing the legal and procedural groundwork for what was internally known as Operation Disassociation. The name, while never confirmed publicly, was whispered among palace staff and legal consultants as shorthand for a decisive and symbolic act. The removal of all remaining royal titles and privileges from the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, or, more pointedly, from Meghan herself. The question of legality was a key consideration. Stripping a royal of titles isn't as simple as issuing a decree. British constitutional tradition demands that such measures be deliberated either by the sovereign, via letters patent, or by parliamentary cooperation, especially if the titles in question were peerages. Advisors quietly liaised with members of the House of Lords, exploring avenues for legal endorsement or support. Conservative peers, already wary of the Sussexes' behavior, were reportedly open to the idea of a legislative amendment that would formalize the removal of titles for any royal who violated the spirit of service or brought the crown into disrepute. Additionally, Charles's advisors weighed the political implications. Would this move be seen as petty retribution or a necessary correction to protect the dignity of the monarchy? To strengthen their case, they compiled a dossier of incidents and examples, interviews, statements, brand partnerships, and moments from Meghan's public life that they believed demonstrated a consistent pattern of undermining the royal institution. Among the more controversial inclusions was Meghan's speech at the 2021 Global Citizen Live event in New York. While the speech focused on vaccine equity and was generally well received, some advisors were disturbed by how Meghan was introduced and presented, often as a royal acting on behalf of global issues, rather than a private citizen or activist. The optics, they believed, created confusion about her role and responsibilities, and blurred the lines between the monarchy's neutral standing and political activism. Even more concerning were Meghan's appearances on American television, especially her interviews with Oprah Winfrey and later, Ellen DeGeneres. In the eyes of Charles's advisory team, these moments were irreparable breaks from royal tradition, airing grievances, leveling accusations, and reshaping the public narrative without the approval or context of the palace. These interviews weren't seen merely as personal catharsis. They were interpreted as strategic moves designed to rewrite the public memory of Meghan's time within the royal family. Meanwhile, Meghan's camp remained confident, at least outwardly. In statements to the press, they insisted that her identity as a humanitarian and advocate for equality was separate from her royal associations. But within the monarchy, this narrative rang hollow. How could she be separate while still using a title bestowed by the institution she so frequently criticized? The question that haunted the royal family wasn't whether Meghan had the right to speak her truth. It was whether she should continue to do so while carrying a title that implied ongoing endorsement from the crown. The public, too, began to draw sharper lines. Political commentators noted that the monarchy was at a crossroads. Either it would act to protect its identity, or it would risk becoming a brand anyone could twist to suit their ambitions. The stakes were high: public trust, royal integrity, and the very definition of what it meant to hold a title within the United Kingdom. As the summer session of Parliament approached, rumblings of legislative support began to surface. A select committee discussed revisiting the legal framework that governed noble titles. While not named directly, the Duchess of Sussex was clearly on the minds of many lawmakers. Some floated the idea of creating a statutory mechanism for the sovereign to revoke titles with parliamentary backing. Within the palace, the mood grew more determined. The decision had not yet been finalized, but the tide was turning. The fallout from Meghan's actions had gone beyond controversy. It had become a constitutional dilemma. And King Charles, no longer merely a father, but now the reigning monarch, prepared to make the call. The reaction from Meghan herself was swift and unmistakable. Through proxies and carefully worded interviews, she signaled disbelief and indignation at the notion of being punished for telling her story. Privately, sources claim she was furious. One aide close to a senior royal household member said, there was genuine rage on her side. She felt this was vindictive, petty, and a betrayal of the family values she thought Charles stood for. But from the royal perspective, the move was not personal, it was institutional. The monarchy had waited, watched, and, for a time, hoped. But the continued erosion of its image in the wake of Meghan's public posture left little room for neutrality. The Queen Consort reportedly told a confidant, "It's not about silencing anyone. It's about protecting the crown from becoming a circus." Thus, the stage was set. The fallout had escalated into action. The royal household was no longer content to simply hope the storm would pass. It was moving to contain the damage and restore what it saw as the rightful sanctity of the titles it bestowed. The decision to strip Meghan Markle of her royal titles was not made lightly. It required careful navigation through centuries-old legal traditions, constitutional protocols, and the delicate balance between the monarchy and parliament. Understanding the legal grounds and the parliamentary maneuvers behind this unprecedented move reveals how the institution of the British monarchy protects its legacy and authority, especially under King Charles's reign. Royal titles in the United Kingdom carry deep historical and legal significance. Titles such as Duke, Duchess, Prince, and Princess are granted by the reigning monarch through letters patent, a formal document that outlines the rights and privileges conferred upon the individual. These titles symbolize not only status but also a certain set of responsibilities and expectations. They represent membership in the royal family, the embodiment of national heritage, and, importantly, public service. In Meghan's case, her title as Duchess of Sussex was granted upon her marriage to Prince Harry in 2018. However, unlike hereditary peerages passed down through generations, royal dukedoms and associated titles are directly tied to the sovereign's discretion and the couple's status within the royal framework. This meant that the monarch had the theoretical authority to revoke or rescind those titles if deemed necessary. What made the decision complex was the modern rarity of such revocations. Historically, titles have been stripped during times of war, treason, or gross misconduct.